Good morning, listeners. My name is Christian.
And my name is Micha, and welcome to the Morning Ponderings podcast.
The Morning Ponderings podcast is a podcast. How do we usually do this? It's been too long.
It's been too long.
A podcast where we aim to explore the possibilities allotted to us by our limited knowledge and understanding.
And the goal of that is that we can have empathy for other people, other viewpoints, and have honest conversations.
Exactly.
We'll just cut that up and just throw that in there.
Be like a sushi chef.
Oh, indeed. That is what I'm like sometimes.
There you go.
Well, how is it going, Christian? It's been a while since we've talked. Now that we're doing this every other week thing, and both of our lives are just spinning in a healthy or maybe not healthy amount of chaos. So how's it been?
I'd say it's been somewhat healthy, I guess, about as healthy as it can be. It's been a lot. It's one of those things where it's like at this point, there's enough time that passes between each episode that we could probably just talk about our lives and make that the podcast. But I mean, to an extent, sometimes that leads into some really interesting conversation about possibilities, and sometimes it's just cool to get to know each other and for our listeners to get to know us.
Yeah,
which is kind of funny to think about, like all of the social media people who like really make it talk about how there's so many people getting to know them, but it's not them getting to know. It's like impossible for them to get to know so many other people.
Yeah.
So
we have just no idea like who's listening. Like, right? I haven't really had anybody reach out to me. I've had a couple people comment on videos. They're like, "Hey, I really love your podcast." Like, "Oh, thanks for listening." Like, but other than that, I've had like no interaction with people who listen, except for my brother, who is now a part of the podcast.
Yeah. Well, speaking of people who listen, I found out that my parents had listened, and especially listened to the couple episodes where we talked about talking to our families about our changing beliefs. Okay. And I realized something. So especially that first episode, people, we cannot define people by the things they say and do in the heat of the moment when emotions are high and tensions are high. And so that first episode really probably should have been put off a little bit, because we were right in the middle of talking about my changing beliefs, and there was a lot of fear and concern and frustration on both sides. Mm-hmm. And that can tend to cause us to express things in ways that are inauthentic to our intentions. And so although in that instance, my feelings were totally valid in that I had interpreted, despite what might have been intended, I had interpreted things that the way I had, and my feelings were valid response to my interpretation. But then over time, we got to have more and more conversations about what was actually meant, where their hearts were. And it made me realize, and I feel kind of bad about it, just because I was speaking to who they like not necessarily who they were in the moment, but so much as the way that conflict, like the things that conflict brings out of us.
Yeah. And I guess
all that whole thing,
just your perception of at the time
of how, my perception of the time of how they were taking what I was sharing. And I was responding to that, which was not fair to them, because we didn't have that time to really debrief and figure out where we were and figure out what our relationship looked like and what our thoughts really were and our concerns really were. And so I ended up speaking about them in ways that were very disrespectful. And although there are some situations and some relationships where maybe that might be warranted because somebody has just been so disrespectful, and the only way you can talk about the situation is about the disrespect and highlighting it, that was not the case with my family. And not only that, but there was times in my frustration when I would talk about their beliefs in ways that were very invalidating. I would try to circle it back around. Like there was times I was talking about how I felt frustrated because it felt like they were making an idol of their understanding of God. But then I would mention briefly about how, like, well, maybe they actually, through their experiences or through God's divine providence, have information that really warrants their confidence. And I mentioned that briefly, but it was completely disproportionate to the way I talked about their beliefs in them the entire rest of the podcast. So I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately about the content that I produce, the content that I put out. And although my feelings are valid, it's not, I don't want to just complain and to make these people feel bad for maybe the way they've conducted themselves temporarily in a way that might be completely inauthentic to who they really are. Or maybe they conducted themselves in a way and I just interpreted it poorly. I don't know. It's not like it's a weird, delicate balance because there's like gaslighting is a thing. And I don't think that's what happened here, but it's not to say that anybody who has these conversations should just keel over or always assume the best. I mean, I think you should always try to assume the best, but there just comes that point, man, where there's somebody who's being intentionally antagonistic and you might need that third party, somebody on the outside to help confirm that for you. But I've just been doing a lot of reflecting on like, okay, what is the content I'm producing? And is it really promoting like the possibilities? Is it really opening the door to consider the possibilities, or am I putting down and belittling some possibilities while propping up and promoting others? And while I think that there's space to talk about like the possibilities that I prefer, I've had a bad tendency to conduct myself in a way that comes across as putting other possibilities down. And I mean, there's definitely some possibilities that I think deserve that. Like, just the whole notion of hell as a place of eternal conscious torment, I really have strong feelings towards that. And I will express those strong feelings. And I want to be open to thinking about the concept of hell in different ways, but there's just some ways that I cannot bring myself to tolerate, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And I think that's valid. And, that's good. It's good to, process those things and kind of do what we, have set out to accomplish, which is to learn to have empathy for all viewpoints and to be fair to all viewpoints. And obviously I do agree that like there are certain positions that, are not deserving of respect because they're not respectable positions. I'm not necessarily speaking about anything that like you've said that your parents believe, but just in general, like certain views of hell, like I don't think deserve respect, but we can at least try to understand and have empathy for the people who do believe them, because I often think that the people who do believe them are victims themselves who have been convinced of something that, all it does is invoke fear. And so anyway, that sounds like a lot. It sounds like a lot to
been doing a lot of processing, trying to figure out like what is the energy and the result of the content that I produce, and really trying to kind of make sure that I'm honoring the initial mission and goal, especially of like this podcast too. So how has there's more things to talk about on my end, but I don't want to monopolize the time. So how has your last couple weeks been?
It has, oh man, it's been stressful and just full of so many things going on. So we are now about to close on this house. Actually, next week we will officially like have the keys, and at this time I'll probably be at the house like next week, which is just insane,
dude. So the next time we see Micha,
no,
if
you're
watching this, like if you're watching the highlights reel or anything, the next time we see Micha, he'll be in a new environment.
Potentially not, because we're not going to move in right away.
Okay.
I'll be at the house because I'll be doing a lot of work on it. So it'll probably be a while before we like fully move in, because we're going to be doing like as many renovations as possible to start so that we don't have to live there and do renovations, because
makes sense.
Once we live there, I don't think we're going to want to do much. But that's exciting, but it's also like stressful because there's like so much paperwork to figure out, and just it's wild. It's wild. And then just how many decisions we have to make on like what paint colors, like just paint colors is a daunting decision of like, oh my gosh, I don't even want to do this.
Paint's expensive, man. Like just to paint my office in here, like I was shocked at how much money it took. This is a relatively small room.
Oh no.
And my wife and we've been wanting to paint our house for a long time, but it's just we have not. There's been other higher priorities to put money into, but yeah, man, good luck with the whole paint. I mean, I guess if you included paint and painting into the cost of like buying the home, it could be easier. But yeah, good luck with that.
Kind of, yeah. That was like one of the things, but then we're also like replacing the carpet into like there's just 2 bedrooms that have carpet, and this guy had a cat, so it kind of smells like cat pee. And so we're like, yeah, we're gonna definitely want to replace that because by the time we clean it and get like a professional cleaner, it's like we might as well have replaced it. So we're just gonna replace it, but deciding on that is like, oh my gosh. And then we're also wanting to we're wanting to rip out the cabinets in the kitchen and put new ones in. But you know,
that's quite a bit of renovating. Yeah.
yeah, we're like really going after it. So it's just been like pretty stressful with all of that. But there is one piece of really good news, something that I've been waiting for months, and that is my guitar is back. I have my guitar in my possession.
Guitar. Can we see your guitar? Well,
You
I mean, can
can.
I see your guitar? I might maybe just make a highlight of this moment.
Her name is Beulah.
Oh, she's so amazing.
She is amazing, and I have been recording a lot the last couple weeks as well.
Awesome.
So my music is, I don't want to say it's getting close, because when I say close, that still means like, you know, like a few months before it'll be released. But I mean, in that sense, it's pretty close. And
I know what you mean. Like I can't, I cannot count the amount of times that I told my wife that I was really close to finishing a game that I was making forever ago. And it was just like, I'm really, really close. And it was like a couple months later, I'm almost there.
Yeah. Yep.
I understand that creative process.
Like. It's super exciting though. The songs are like sounding really good, at least to my ears. And
I mean, I've heard 2 of them, so sounded good to me.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm working on getting some friends involved in harmonies and yeah, just some other like background vocal stuff. So waiting for them to get back with me. But and then I also just have a lot to do with figuring out like what my artist name is going to be, and then I need to like do some photo shoots, so I like have some pictures and then like figure out the album artwork. And but it's coming along. It's coming along, and with the house now, like that might push back the date a bit just cuz it's going to take so much work to get that house in.
Yeah, it's a lot of paperwork to fill out. I remember when we bought this house, it was just like we had to sit down for a couple hours with, I think it was like a contractor, and we just sign here, sign here, sign here, sign here, sign here. My hands were hurting by the end of that whole session.
Yep.
And then you'll like for months after that, you'll receive just years after that, you'll receive mail talking about this is your final notice to get your mortgage warranted. It's like, I remember I just kept getting those, and I was like, you know, I'm just gonna make sure finally, just to make sure this isn't a scam. And so I called our mortgage people, and they were like, oh yeah, no, that's totally a scam. And I was like, okay, that's what I thought. I've just been ignoring it for like 2 years now, and the persistence kind of gave it away.
Yeah.
But
my gosh. Yeah.
So beware of that.
I will be aware of that. Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot. And then also the yard. That's another thing. Like we're having to fix up the yard because it's like all the water runs up to the house, which is why they had problems in the past. And so like we've got to figure out how to get some dirt out there, and
you gotta do some terraforming.
Terraforming. Is that like?
That's like when you sculpt and change the landscape in a space.
Yes. So yeah, that.
There you go. We have learned new language. So the word of the day, listeners, is terraforming.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's been wild.
Sounds exhausting and exciting, all in one nice big old package with a bow on top. You look exhausted.
Yes, it is, and I am exhausted. And it'll be a while before I have a day off too. So by the time I have a day off, we're gonna have the house. Oh my gosh, that's insane.
Right? Oh boy. Exciting stuff.
Yeah. So
Let's
that's
see
been
what
my
other
two
things have
weeks.
happened
Yeah. What else has happened in your life in the last 2 weeks?
in my world. Well, stuff has happened. I can't think of it at the moment, so we'll just move on. My wife and I had some recent life experiences and events take place that it was kind of like I look back on my life and I recognize that there are certain events and moments in my life that felt like they were being orchestrated or guided by some kind of a higher power. And while my feelings about that possibility are kind of mixed in that I've talked about it before, but it feels kind of weird that there would be a higher power that would intentionally be active in my privileged life whilst letting other people suffer immensely or just outright starve to death in other places of the world. I don't know how to reconcile with that in my head, apart from maybe God is limited and just doing the best that they can. So that to say, recently, one of those experiences occurred again, where it felt like there was, like, I guess I'll just say that it felt like God was active in my wife and I's life, kind of trying to guide us and direct us towards a particular, in a particular direction.
Yeah.
The destination is unknown, and that, from experience, seems to be a theme.
Kind of a common way that it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, a common way that it goes. Whenever it seems like God might be at work in our lives, taking us in a direction, sometimes we think we know the destination and we'll move that way, only to get so far for that destination to then change. It's like the carrot on the end of the stick that's just constantly shifting positions to take us in different directions. It's never about the destination. It's about wherever it is we're going.
Yeah.
And so recently a series of events took place, and the thought arose of, okay, is there some kind of intentionality behind what has been happening? And if there is, to acknowledge and honor the possibility that God might be guiding us in some way for some reason, how are we to interpret that? How are we to take that and consider it in a way consider it with integrity, in a way that is honest, and in a way that is not reckless? So yeah, that's that kind of inspired me to ask you if you wanted to talk about that topic of how do we honor that possibility that God could be at work in our lives, and what are instances or moments in our lives that we've had where we're suspicious of maybe that was God at work, maybe it wasn't. Because I'm still in that place of like, even though this thing happened very recently in my life, if it was God was not obvious enough to be like, oh yes, not only do I exist, but this is who I am and my nature. No, it just seems like there's some higher powers or other forces at play.
Yeah.
So it's still non-specific enough, but yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah. Let me I'll swing full atheist on you real quick, and then I'll kind of swing back a little bit. So just to kind of maybe hit some of the spectrum here. So one thing I heard in a video recently by Captain Dadpool, which, really, really enjoy his content, but
same, yeah.
He said that if we're going to make a supernatural claim, like to say that like God is saying this, speaking this, telling me, guiding, whatever, then you have to rule out every natural possibility first. Now, I don't 100% agree with that, because I think if there is some kind of divine being, then it's going to work in the natural. And so it's going to use I guess, your natural explanations, which, anyway, I could get it. Maybe I'll get into that in a second. But so to his point, what are, I guess, the natural explanations to, I guess, maybe you and your wife feeling kind of led in the same direction? And was it, let me just ask this before I say more. Was it kind of one of those things where you both like were thinking the same thing, and then you like discussed it and were like, oh, okay, like we're thinking the same thing. We should, that's kind of weird that we haven't talked about it, but we're thinking the same thing.
Yeah. It was one of those strange things. It was a tough thing to wrestle with. So my mind had been in this direction for a while.
Yeah.
But my wife and I weren't necessarily on the same page towards this particular direction and conclusion. And so I wanted to honor her in that and recognize where her heart was and where she was feeling called. And so I didn't push it too hard or too much, and just kind of let things be. And if she would eventually reach the conclusion to agree with me, then we would act upon it and figure out what we're going to do. And so it was an instance of like things in life started to get very turbulent. And that's especially concerning for me whenever I'm talking about like the guidance of a higher power. It's like, it is like, why would I just take issue with the idea of like a God making your life miserable or bad because to try and force you into and coerce you into taking action in a certain direction.
Yeah.
And so that question arose of like, is that what is happening? Are these things one after another in our lives that seem to be going awry? Are they happening towards this, like for this reason, because God is trying to take us in this direction? And one of the ways that I wanted to honor that possibility is I wanted to like observe, because I totally agree with you on the idea of like, it might be that there's natural explanations, totally. And it might be that God is at work in those natural explanations. Why would God make it something super flashy and showy when, especially if like, I feel like the relationship God, if there is a God, wants to have with me is one of uncertainty. It's one of, like, I did another interesting word study on what faith is, by the way, and that kind of plays into this a little bit, but I won't go down that rabbit hole just yet. But God, I think, wants a very particular relationship with me. And although it's not what other Christians would say I should have or would think of as a valid relationship with God, or as a relationship that would qualify me to be a Christian, I believe it to be legitimate. And that is, if there is a God. So I'm in this place of uncertainty. So how is God going to preserve that relationship and work in my life, if not by working in my life via natural means? And so in this particular instance, these things are going awry, and it's like, okay, so what are some truths about specifically parenting? Parenting is where my mind went. What are some truths about parenting that I can think about to understand what God could be trying to say to us in this instance? And maybe God isn't saying this, but just to honor that possibility. So I got to thinking about that. And it's like, well, as a parent, and I found that using gentle parenting techniques in my particular circumstances with my particular kids has been very effective.
Yeah.
And when it comes to gentle parenting, you do not shield your kids from the consequences. Yeah. You inform them of the consequences of their actions, but you also don't fabricate consequences that don't necessarily fit. Like, it's very much a matter of helping your kids to be aware of the natural consequences of an action. Yeah. And then letting them feel the consequences of that action should they choose to take it anyway. So it's like, hey, if you touch that stove, it's hot, don't touch it. And then they touch it anyway. And they're like, I burned myself and now I'm crying. But I've learned that lesson. My parents, I've learned that I can trust them. And when they say not to do something, there's probably a good reason for it. So looking to that truth in gentle parenting specifically, I was looking at this. I was like, okay, the things that have gone awry in our lives recently, are they the natural consequences of something?
Mm-hmm.
And they were the natural consequences of, I can't, it's tough because I can't get into the details too much, but they were the natural consequences of decisions that were made by particular people.
Mm-hmm.
And they were natural consequences of responses to issues, and just many other things. And I think there was a few other things throughout there that might have just been bad luck, but other things had a theme in this way. And so I was thinking, if this is God working in our lives and trying to make us aware of something, it seems as though, and my wife also had a dream about things to come, I guess you could say, a vision. And maybe it was just a dream. Maybe it actually had no bearing in reality, but maybe it was a vision. I'm not going to dismiss the possibility, which I'm going to circle back around to this, but I know the video you're talking about, Captain Dadpools, and I actually want to comment on that after this. But so she had this vision, and this vision also played into this theme of the things that we had been going through. And it was a vision of what would be the natural consequence of if we continued to do what we were doing in the space where the choices were being made that would potentially inevitably lead to this outcome. And so it's like, okay, it seems like God is just telling us, hey, look at the fruits of this decision. Is it really the right decision? And choose wisely. And it's like, okay, so that's something I can get behind. That's gentle parenting. That's making us aware of the consequences, telling us to look at the fruits, and then leaving the decision to us. And it's like, if God is really using these things to try and speak into our lives in any way, I feel like it's in that way. It's not God just hitting us over the head and saying that there's bad things. One of the things I had mentioned to my wife while we were trying to figure all this out is, because the big question is, okay, am I doing the right thing? And now Satan is trying to, or the bad guy is now trying to oppose me and make bad things happen in my life to stop me. Or am I doing the wrong thing and God is trying to direct me, or there's some natural consequence or some consequence of me doing the wrong thing that God is imposing? And so scripturally, when I look at different examples of that, what I found is anytime it is God that is like punishing or doing, in this instance, I feel like some kind of a gentle parenting thing, there's always a very clear reason for why it's happening and a very clear thing that is going to happen as a result. Whereas anytime you're doing the right thing and the enemy is in opposition to you, there's no clear rhyme or reason to the bad things that might happen. So I'd mentioned that to my wife, and then that got us reflecting on, okay, is there a clear reason? And then we started to pick up on these themes. Those, all of that's taken together, whether God exists or not, that process brought us to, I feel, a reasonable, rational conclusion. In that, if we stick with this, we're taking a major risk, especially for the health of our kids. And if we make this adjustment, it's going to be we're reducing that risk. It's a logical choice and decision to make, whether God was involved in it or not. So that's a very tiptoey way to talk about recent experiences. And I'm curious what your thoughts are towards that, and maybe how you might reflect and relate to it. But really quick, to talk about the video of Captain Dadpools that you had mentioned, there is a difficulty, and maybe it's actually a different video, but a different video or the same one, where Captain Dadpool is talking about how when you make the assertion that there is no God versus the assertion that there is a God, that one person's making the claim and the other person's not. And I get it, and I totally understand, but I feel like when you say there is no God, you are making an assertion that sounds like a claim at the very least, and it leads to very unproductive conversations. When the reality for most people, there are definitely those out there who think they can prove that there is no God, but for reality for most people is there is not sufficient evidence for these people to believe that there's a God. And that's totally reasonable and valid. And that's not a claim that there is no God. That's just saying, I don't know. And then a productive conversation can be had after that. So I'm definitely in a place where it's like, I recognize the possibility that there could be a God, and I recognize the possibility that there might not be. I have reasons to hope for both. And so I have reasons to defend both possibilities vigorously.
Sure.
And so when I think about how I then conduct myself and how I live my life and live it in such a way where it is honoring, and it's honoring of those possibilities and those hopes.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely something that I've been trying to navigate. Like, how do I live a life that is honoring to the possibility that there isn't a God and honoring to the possibility that there is simultaneously?
That's quite a tension.
Or at least up until God proves that he's absolutely real to me, in which case I don't need to balance the possibilities.
Yeah. So to kind of speak on the, I guess what you were just talking about, which is like making the claim there is God, there is no God. Somebody described it like this, and that made a lot of sense to me. And I'll kind of change the analogy to make it my own. But let's say there's a door, and the one person says if you open this door, there's a portal to another world. Okay, just like something ridiculous, like supernatural, like that doesn't exist. No way.
Yeah.
That's a pretty extraordinary claim, right? Now you're not allowed to open the door, right? Because then you would know. The other person says, I don't think there's a portal behind the door. Now there's a difference between saying, I don't believe there's a portal behind the door, but I can't prove, I don't know that because I can't open the door. And then there's a difference between like that and then saying there is no portal. Like, I know that there is no portal behind the door. So the way to describe these two camps of people is there's the Gnostic and there's the agnostic. The Gnostic, like, for example, there's Gnostic Christians and Gnostic atheists. A Gnostic Christian would say, I know for a fact God exists. A Gnostic atheist would say, I know for a fact God does not exist. An agnostic would say, I believe God exists, but I can't know he exists. Agnostic atheist says, I don't believe God exists, but I can't know that. So I think it's important to differentiate the kind of four camps that you can fall in. I feel like most atheists, and maybe this is just the ones that I have interacted with, are agnostic because they recognize, like, I mean, I can't know that for certain, but I don't believe that. Like, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But like, you know, still, I guess maybe some more than others open to the possibility, some not at all. And I totally understand that.
Yeah, but I understand. I also agree. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do think, like, yeah, it sounds like a claim to say there is no God, but like that's a way less extraordinary claim than saying there is a God. Because saying there is a God is pretty extraordinary, which, as many atheists will say, requires extraordinary evidence. And they have not been given that extraordinary. I have not been given that extraordinary evidence, which is why I'm where I am. And so,
this actually goes into the recent word study. I did yet another. The word faith has meant four things to me throughout my life, apparently. And one of which I absolutely despise. Like, I dislike the way that faith is thought of popularly. And that is this idea of faith being belief without evidence. Like, it always hurts, like, when not only atheists think of faith in this way, but Christians think and perpetuate faith in this way.
Yeah.
And that's just not what it is, like, at all. And I actually did, you shared a video with me on TikTok, and I got into the comments of that video, and I got into a conversation with this other guy who kind of was challenging my understanding of faith at the time, which I've talked about on this podcast. And I was like, I'm going to double check it, because I am a fallible person. I'm going to double check the working definition that I'm going off of, just so I can see, I can correct it if I'm wrong. Turns out I was a bit wrong. I think that it's everything I've kind of concluded. Like a lot of the same things can be pulled from this other understanding of faith as could be pulled from the prior one. But looking at the word studies, I accidentally mixed up a different word for faith than was the word actually used for faith. But apparently, the word faith itself in Hebrews 11:1 is divine persuasion, to be divinely persuaded, or for something divine to persuade you. And it's specifically specified that it is not something that a human being can get by any work of their own. You cannot, no matter how hard you try, just simply have faith or get faith or get more faith. However much faith you have is directly the result of however much faith God has chosen to give you, apparently. And in the rest of the passage, it was talking about, so if that's what faith is, and then it was talking about how faith then is the substance or the basis of the expectations that we have towards Scripture. And those expectations, I've heard them talked about in ways of like, these are the things we expect and our expectations are warranted. Or, okay, so that is the basis of expectation, and that would usually be confidence. How confident are you? And that's warranted on life experiences, testimonies, and other evidences that you can pull from. And then one thing that I found especially interesting, where there's that comma and it talks about assurances of the things unseen.
Yeah.
Assurance is actually, I don't know how they get that word from it, because it can actually be one of two other kinds of words which are more proper to it. And that is either the proof of things unseen or the testing of things unseen. And I find that last bit, the testing of things unseen, to be especially interesting, because on one hand, yeah, if God shows himself and reveals himself in such a way where it gives you extremely strong faith and it's a proof of the things unseen, okay, I can understand that. But then there's the testing of the things unseen. It takes me to that analogy we're using of like, behind this door, there's a portal. If you have faith, you're opening that door. Opening that door is not a lack of faith. Opening that door is the testing of the things unseen.
Sure.
It's a effort that you're putting forward to receive divine persuasion. So there's nothing wrong with opening that door. And I feel like this is like, faith cannot exist without action. It's either God has given it to you on a silver platter, or you are like seeking it out. And I think that like, when I think about like the misuse of the word faith in terms of like Christianity as it is a faith, people will try to say, oh, you need to just believe. You shouldn't ask the questions. You shouldn't dig deep to see the truth of it or the lack thereof. But if this understanding of faith is legitimate, then those whom God has given little faith have like, if they really do have that faith, they need to look, they need to ask the questions, they need to seek the truth to the best that they can. Like that's, if they don't do that, then there is no faith.
Right.
And I just found that so interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I think I want to point out that I guess that view of faith as being something that only God can give you is one of many perspectives. It sounds very Calvinist to me, where like,
it's apparently the way, like the Greek word and the way that it's defined, that's the way that it is defined. And that's the word that is used in that particular passage. But it's one of those things where it's like, and I think I see where you're going with this, like the whole idea of like being very Calvinist and like, oh, you have the people who are predestined for God and the people who are just going to hell.
Right.
But I think that comes from the superiority complex of humans more than anything. I think that no matter how much faith God chooses to give you, every bit of it is valid. Like he's not, if he's chosen to give you little faith or no faith at all, it's not that you've just been cast out and into the fire and that you're hopeless. It's that you have been given this unique opportunity to experience life in this unique way for whatever purposes. Maybe there's purposes, who knows? But, and I think that it's even scriptural that God judges you based upon what you've done with what you've been given. And so in this instance, you might have not been given any faith, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're destined for hell. That might mean that you just need to do the best that you can with the information you've been given, and God will honor that. And of course, I'm speaking all of this to honor the possibility of there being a God. I also recognize that there might not be a God. I don't know. God hasn't made that information known to me.
Yeah, I think it kind of, whether God exists or not, kind of well, I guess this would be assuming God exists. To some extent creates a paradox, which I feel like there are lots of paradoxes whenever you get into theology, where it's like, okay, well, if faith is something that I cannot manufacture on my own, if it's something that only God can give to me, then like, what does that mean for working on my faith? And like, even like, would my questioning have an influence on my faith if it's only something God can give me? You know, like it's, and then maybe you talk about how like it's through, see that it's a paradox, because then it's like, you could say, well, it's through maybe those questions that God gives you more faith, but that's through your doing that God would give you something more. So like, it's interesting.
Well, I'll say this much. On one hand, I think that faith and however much faith God has given you can change at any time, and that God can choose to give you more of it. But I think oftentimes we Christians, especially in the pressure that we experience, we feel pressured to express and think that we need to have more faith than we've been given. And so sometimes working on your faith is just looking at how much information God has actually given you, trying to determine what kind of relationship God actually wants with you, as opposed to just assuming that, I have strong faith. I have reason to be certain that God exists. For me, like working on my faith has been cutting off the parts that I had assumed. And I actually found out that my faith is much smaller than what I thought it was. And that was at first a startling discovery, and it kind of, it shakes your faith, so to speak. And yes, it did shake it, and it shook off a lot of junk that I had tacked up there because I felt like I had to. And now I realize my faith is very small, and there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that. It is, if there is a God, exactly as God intended. And so I can find peace in that. And maybe someday God will choose to broaden that faith. Maybe someday God will choose to make himself more known to me in more obvious ways. But until that day comes, this is where my faith is. And for whatever purposes God may have for that, it's not my place to say that I should have more. God should have given me more. I really think about like the parable of the talents and how like God gave to each person a different amount of talents. And that wasn't necessarily because one person was like better than everyone else. It was just because each person had a different responsibility. And granted, he gave unto them what as according to their abilities is kind of how it was put. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the person who only got one was incompetent. Granted, what he then did with that one proved that he was incompetent. Yeah, but he didn't have to be incompetent with that one talent. Sure. And so faith given out to everybody as God has chosen to, if he's given you little, if he's given you none, you are valid. I am valid. And I think that's a big issue because a lot of Christians like to say that you're not.
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah, that is true. So yeah, that is important to say. So I don't think we ever really circled back around to...
Why did we get on this whole rant about faith to begin with?
I don't remember. Because of a video that I had sent to you, and we were talking about faith and extraordinary claims and like all this stuff. Gnostic Christians, agnostic, all that stuff. But
I remember we were talking about it for some other reason, like... But yeah, and back to...
We just followed the rabbit holes as they kept getting deeper. So
it's what we do best.
True. So to what you're saying about, I guess seeing things that look orchestrated in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
In your kind of current life situations, and I guess kind of like how to make sense of that and how to like maybe
Mm-hmm.
interpret that. I think one thing, this is just my personal experience at the moment, that I am noticing is, at least I found out like between me and Anna, that like some of these things that we would have classified as divine have happened now that we're not seeking
Mm-hmm.
that, not believing
Yeah.
that, like things that we would call miracles, things that we would call these divine coincidences that are like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, that just seems really convenient. Like, and maybe realizing that that just kind of happens sometimes. And
Yeah.
that's not to like take away at all of those things, but maybe to like just celebrate them, like, hey, that's pretty nice. Like,
Yeah.
um, they're like,
I
that
mean,
just
I did
happens.
that whole, or at least I tried to do that whole series about godless miracles because I wanted to see the ways that God might work in the secular world, or to see the ways that these things pan out, whether there's a God or not.
Hmm.
It's hard to say one way or the other because I think that the temptation of Christians a lot of the time is to just to say, oh, God will work in your life when you choose to give it to him. But in the same breath, they might say, but it is only by the proddings of the Holy Spirit that you come to God in the first place. So is God at work in my life before I'm a Christian or the
Yeah,
whole time? What is it?
exactly. Yeah.
And so
It's,
I
yeah.
honestly think definitely, maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe these things just happen for anybody and everybody. Or maybe God's just at work in people's lives, whether they're Christian or not, because he gives a crap.
Yeah.
And maybe God isn't actually the Christian God. Maybe there's just a generally benevolent God towards every person who seeks to do good with their life. Or in general, I don't know. Like
Yeah.
apparently, like there's the whole idea of how the rain falls upon the good and the wicked.
Hmm.
And so it's
Yeah.
just it's something that's difficult to wrap our minds around. But I totally get what you're saying in that like now that you're in this space, you're starting to recognize, oh, these things didn't just happen because I was a Christian.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's something that can be very shaking, I imagine.
It's I mean, it's kind of nice because it's like, okay, well, like at least it's not like my life is just like spiraling now that I'm not a Christian. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
actually pretty much the same. Though I mean, it's not the same because like a lot of things have changed. But I think one thing that, at least this is like a big question that always kind of rolls in my mind, is like, does it even matter how much we try to define what these experiences are? And I
Mm-hmm.
think the answer is yes and no. Like I'm very much in a place where, I've got friends who are Christians, I've got friends who are not. I've got like kind of all across the board. And so like obviously my friends who are Christians would say like, that's God, and like that's what works for them, and what brings them comfort, brings them peace and joy. And so I'm like, hey, that's great. And then for my friends who are not Christians, it's like they just celebrate in the moment of things kind of happening to happen that way. And it's like,
Yeah.
that's great because that works for you. And like I guess I see the validity in, I want to just say like just doing what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
And what like brings you joy, as long as it's not to the detriment of others, which I think is also, I mean, it's kind of a hard, like in my mind, I'm like, I guess like recently, like with conversations and really just commenting back and forth with people on TikTok, it's like, I don't want to
Those always go so well.
always, yeah, I don't want to like defend something toxic, but at the same
Mm.
time, I want to defend people and like defend their right to, I guess, do what works for them and do what like brings them joy, as long as it's not to the detriment of others. Like just on one of my videos recently, some guy was just going after anyone who had the smallest scent of Christianity. This person was like going after them, which
Mm.
is rare that like I've got one of the non-Christians is like really antagonizing
Yeah.
the Christians in my comments, which is like, oh, it's interesting switch.
Yeah.
But like he was like being rude and not nice, and like told one person like, you're a bad person, and it's like, bro, like you don't know them. You can't say that.
Yeah.
And
Didn't you do like a response video to that? I think I remember saying something like that.
no,
Unless that was
no,
someone
I
else.
did not
Oh, that
respond to
was
this
someone else.
person. I blocked them eventually.
Gotcha.
But like, he was saying like, he was accusing me of defending something evil, which he thinks Christianity is evil, basically. But like, it's like I'm defending people that you're just like you're being absolutely like unkind to, and like that's not okay. Like just because you disagree with somebody and think that like certain beliefs, I think certain beliefs in Christianity, especially evangelical Christianity, are toxic. But I'm not going around telling them they're bad people because I don't believe
Mm.
they're bad people. I just think that something they believe is wrong, but like that doesn't make you a
And
bad
potentially
person.
harmful.
And yeah, but like the people in my comments were not being like, at least some of them, like some of them I blocked them
Yeah.
because they were being toxic. But like this person said something really nice. Like they obviously are a Christian, but like I took it as their best intention to like be nice, and they like went after this person. I was like, no, like you don't get to do that, because like at the end of the day, I just want people to like love each other and know that they're loved. And so like I'm not there to just like, I'm not going to bash other people for doing what works for them, and I'm not going to let other people do, not on my page. I don't let that happen, because that just doesn't, it's not going to help us in any
Doesn't sit
way.
well. Yeah. Yeah, I totally, I see I get what you mean. Like that definitely was a big part of like personal reflection. Like, am I really being honoring to? Yeah, I'm starting to sound like a broken record. I need to drink more coffee.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. It's a difficult tightrope, I guess. I think listening to the Liturgist podcast has been really helpful for me, because they try to look at Christianity through a non-dualistic lens, which I feel like almost every belief turns very dualistic very quick, where there's an in group, an out group, and trying to break out of that mindset of binaries, and thinking that like, even that there's a difference between you and me, there's a difference between me and someone else, like we're all just people, and maybe there is no difference between us, or at least there doesn't have to be. And so anyway, that's, at least for me, like that's helped me have a lot more compassion for people, even people who have some toxic beliefs. I don't have compassion for the belief, but for the people I do.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. It can be tough because like a lot of times there's a lot of beliefs, especially in evangelical Christianity, that are very easy to weaponize and very widely weaponized. And figuring out how to navigate waters of like grace and understanding, but also not being tolerant of people being abusive with their beliefs. It's tough. It's not an easy thing to do at all.
It's not. And I think it's especially hard because the victims of these belief systems become the victimizers. And so on the one hand, they are victims of something that, at least like, I mean, a lot of people have said this, so it's not just me, but like I was a victim of the shame that was heaped on me, and living with literally like hating myself, thinking I deserved to die, like that was all I was worth. And so, but what did I do? I preached that, because that's what I believed, and like I was a victim of that belief, and it did like hurt me a lot, and I'm still like recovering from that. But I also taught that same thing to other people, and like that's why it's so complicated, and why I think we need to have empathy for each other, because the people who are perpetuating it, I would say, at least for the most part, they don't know that they're harming other people, because they're harmed themselves. But I don't there are a lot of people I don't excuse, though, at least like the people who should know better, some of the Christian leaders, theologians who have had the time to study and have chosen to perpetuate a belief that gives them power, but really just harms a lot of people.
Yeah. It's crazy, some of the stories I hear about some of the things you learn in like seminary, and then knowing that there are some pastors out there who've been through seminary and learned those things and yet continue to preach the things they do.
Yeah.
It just comes across so dishonest and manipulative. Yeah. It's like, why? I don't get it. But to circle things back around a little bit,
sure.
I'm really curious. So you're definitely at a place in your life where, or correct me if I'm wrong, but you're at a place in your life where you are trying, and I totally understand why you might be, but trying to like disconnect the fortune in your life from God's providence or favor, or the idea of a God's providence or favor. Is that right?
Yeah, to some extent. And the reason for that right now is because I was never allowed to trust myself and believe in
Mm,
myself and believe that I could do anything good. And so for the first time in my life, I'm starting to like give myself credit for things
okay.
and like believe in myself. And so part of that is, I guess, not giving God all the credit for everything and giving myself credit for, you know what? Like I did that. And like
Yeah.
that's okay. It's not it's not conceited. It's just true. Like so anyway, I don't know if you had a
Yeah.
follow-up
I
question.
totally see what you mean. And I mean, even in the context of God, it's like, why would God bother to make us so capable of so many things if he's supposed to be the one driving it all anyway, to begin with?
Yeah.
So I think that there's validity to be found in like recognizing the good that a person can do. I hate the whole concept of total depravity and being no good whatsoever without God. And I feel like there's like the duality of that, like, oh, we're also it feels like a lot of Christians try to paint us as these like completely neutral beings of like just we're just these cardboard cutouts of human-like figures, and then anything bad we do is Satan's fault, and anything good we do is God's fault, and then
Yeah.
we essentially don't exist. We're just getting pushed and pulled by these two forces, and I find that just to be so just I just don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't like that notion, even within the Christian context. And it's nice, like outside of the Christian context, it's a lot easier to separate from that. And then within, it's like trying to make sense of these powerful forces at play and our role in that. So to try, it almost feels like elevating ourselves
Yeah.
to think that we actually play a significant role in all of that. But I don't think it is. I think we wouldn't exist if there wasn't, like, assuming that possibility, we wouldn't exist if we didn't play a significant role in everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
I've already kind of talked about how I wrestle with the idea of God being at work in my life, in that he would put resources and time into me and not somebody else. And there's just feels like there's so many more important things that God could be doing if he's at work in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it like as uncomfortable as that makes me, it also kind of brings me a little bit of comfort to think that maybe there's a reason, I don't know, but maybe there is a God that's benevolent and working in my life. And it's just the constant wrestling in me.
Yeah.
So for you, uh, you've expressed that part of what's uncomfortable about the idea of God being at work in your life is that it robs ownership of your choices, your activities, and what
Yeah.
you do and accomplish. To then consider that maybe God is at the center of it all. So, have you found an understanding or a possible understanding of how God might be able to be at work in your life or in the world that maybe you can make peace with? Or is it still one of those things where it's like, there's not really anything out there at the moment, so I'd rather just assume that there's not a God at work and go about my life?
Hmm. Right now, I have not made peace with, I guess, any possibility of God. Just like I'm still kind of like exploring and like trying to figure that out. I think the closest thing that I would have is kind of the non-dualist God that the liturgist talks about, and this kind of divine force that's like in all of us and like moves in all of us, and but is not what we would say is a personal God,
Mm,
or even a personable God. I guess I maybe should be more specific there.
yeah.
That would probably be the closest thing at the moment that I could have peace with, but right now I think I'm still trying to learn to believe in myself and believe in
Mm-hmm.
and like trust in who I am, and really just figure out who I am, because I feel like I had denied myself my entire life. And so yeah, and then now I'm like starting to work through trauma I didn't know I had as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes from years of like hating myself and denying myself of any good thing. And so
Mm,
I'm not really interested in making peace with something at the moment, just because
yeah.
I need to figure out myself first. So that's
That
kind of,
totally makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah,
Like it makes me think of how, like, for example, political parties. You can't really just make peace with a political party until you've figured out what your values are and who you are as a person.
yeah,
Before you do that, you can't really align yourself with any particular thing which is like ethically and identity, like charged with like identity. And so I think what you're doing is totally valid, and I might even need to do some reflecting on that. And I have been doing it a little bit, but not with that kind of focus. And so I might need to do some figuring that out, put more focus in figuring that out myself, because that's something that I've been trying to come to terms with, especially in the whole concept of like free will. What, who am I? What are
yeah,
my values? Would I, if God exists and is active in my life, when I learned about that God, if I learned things about that God that did not mesh, that did not line up with what I value, would I even follow that God? Would I
yeah,
choose to worship them? And I can't know that until I figure out me. And it's weird to say that, because I feel like a lot of Christians have this mentality of like, oh, it's not about you. You lay yourself down. You die to yourself and you give yourself to God to define who
mm-hmm,
you are.
yeah,
And it's like, but God gave me to myself
yeah,
first.
yeah.
And
I think that's a
mhm,
huge thing, that like if God exists and God created you to be how you are, and as they say, like God made you proud of you, like to be who you are, then what would be the harm of me being proud of myself for the way that God created me? You know,
mhm.
how could that be wrong in my mind? And I know that there's always an answer for that, but at least that's just for me. Yeah,
You know what it makes me think of? There's that whole idea of like, love your neighbor as yourself, but then also the greatest commandments being love God and love others. So it's like, even biblically speaking, and I just return to the Bible again and again because that's my history. But even that sort of speaking, if that is the truth, we are to love ourselves, and in loving ourselves, we're loving God in a way. Like
yeah,
loving other people as ourselves means that we need to, if loving other people is loving God, and we need to love other people as ourselves, then loving ourselves and loving other people in that way, that whole relationship, all three of those dynamics together, would be how you love God. And I like that. I like that idea. I like that
yeah,
possibility. And I think that really speaks to what you're talking about. Like, we can't just throw ourselves away. And
yeah,
it's weird. It's so weird, this obsession with making you not exist. Like,
yeah,
you are pointless. You are just this cardboard cutout to be pulled by evil and good forces. And if you try to exist, that's a bad thing. You need to give yourself over to God so that he can define you. And it's like, but that sounds like it's just a complete insult to whatever it is God is up to. Like, why
yeah,
in the world would God give us these things if we're just supposed to throw them away?
yeah,
And people talk about, oh, he gave it to us. He gave us this free will, this ability to choose, and this unique personality, so that because he wanted us to genuinely choose a relationship with him. But you can't genuinely choose a relationship if you just throw it all away.
right,
It's just, I'm working
yeah,
through a lot of those questions. You might see some TikToks of me asking those questions, because I've been asking them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, speaking of that, we need to wrap up. So
Yes.
where can people find you?
You can find me at Truth Voyager on TikTok.
You can find me at Pondering Together on TikTok. And you can find our show. It's called the Morning Ponderings podcast. I guess if you're here, you know how to find it.
Yes, but if you want to specifically seek out the one on YouTube where you can leave comments and feedback, we'd love to hear from you. We might talk about your comments and feedback. Oh, speaking of which, we'll talk about this next episode because it might dive into some more conversation that we don't have time for. But somebody finally left a review on Apple Podcasts.
Two people did.
Oh, two people did?
Yeah.
Well, somebody wrote a review.
Oh, okay.
I may have reviewed our show myself, so I might be one of those ones that didn't necessarily write a review directly.
That's fine. Oh well.
But somebody left some feedback, and that's they brought up something. I don't think they brought it up in a way that was very like it sounded a little abrasive, but I think that there's a true topic that could be explored and talked about from what they had to say. So we'll dive into that, but that's to say we do read your guys' feedback and we will talk about them.
We do.
And then also, if you like what we're doing, we have in the description of this video or this episode, there's a link that you can find and follow to find options on how to support us.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thank you all for listening, and we hope you all have a wonderful 2 weeks.
Indeed. Have a great one, or great two. I know there's some big things. My mind is just like at a crawl. My coffee's over there. I tried taking a sip of it just a moment ago and it was too hot. And now I'm just tired and looking at my coffee longingly. I'm going to see if I can't take another sip, wake up my brain a little bit. Still kind of hot. Got a little bit though.